The Gulfstream G700 cut through California fog like a promise being kept. Below, Silicon Valley stretched in geometric patterns of ambition realized and dreams deferred. Inside the cabin, a voice carried the weight of truth delayed, but no longer denied. Victoria Ashford divorced her husband as a failure 10 months ago. Today, at the IPO celebration of the company she stole, 600 people would learn she'd walked away from $9 billion. The words dissolved into recycled air, leaving only the hum of engines and the inevitability of what came next. 10 months earlier, February 2024 arrived in Palo Alto with sunshine that made everything look cleaner than it was. The house on Barron Park Drive sat unremarkable among tech wealth. 3 bedrooms purchased with cash, but maintained as if rented. Ethan Thorne's Toyota Camry entered the driveway at 7:15, engine ticking its familiar complaint as he killed the ignition. A Chipotle bag sat warm against the passenger seat. Dinner for a family that no longer felt like one. Victoria occupied the Italian sofa they'd bought on credit she didn't know he'd paid off immediately. Her MacBook balanced on knees that never settled, the video call with Boston filling the screen with her mother's perpetual disappointment. Margaret Ashford's voice needed no amplification to carry judgment across 3,000 miles. "Victoria, sweetheart, are you certain about this marriage? A software engineer." The words found their target. Victoria's fingers whitened around the laptop, her response coming through teeth that wanted to clench. "Mother, we've exhausted this topic." Richard Ashford materialized beside his wife, 40 years of Wall Street poker tells compressed into a face that had forgotten how to show genuine emotion. Investment banking had taught him to read balance sheets and people with equal precision. His daughter's marriage ledger showed nothing but red ink. "My colleagues' daughters married surgeons, hedge fund managers, men who build empires. You married someone who maintains them." Ethan heard it from the entryway. The bag in his hand carried the smell of corporate efficiency, disguised as Mexican food. He set his keys on the counter without sound, watched his wife's shoulders curl inward like paper approaching flame, then opened his laptop because some performances required props. The email glowed at the top of his inbox. Apex Financial Q1. Revenue, $3.2 billion. Board approval required. The sender's address ended in a domain Victoria had never seen. Warren Morrison's signature sat at the bottom, casual as breathing for men who moved billions before breakfast ended. Harper appeared on the stairs, 11 years old and fluent in reading rooms. She descended 3 steps, stopped when she saw the laptop screen, saw her father's face performing its careful work of appearing unbothered. The video call ended. Victoria closed the MacBook hard enough to make a statement nobody was listening to. Harper's hand found Ethan's, small fingers wrapping around calluses earned from years of typing code that built empires Victoria didn't know existed. Her whisper carried the weight of questions she'd been asking for months. "Dad, when will you show her the truth?" The question deserved an answer that wouldn't break a child's faith in fairness existing anywhere in the universe. Ethan knelt, brought himself to eye level with the only person in the world who knew all of him, the good and the testing, and the parts he wasn't proud of. "Perhaps never, sweetheart. If she cannot love me as merely an engineer, she doesn't deserve to know who I truly am." Harper's expression cycled through emotions too complex for 11. Understanding competed with fury, both losing to the deeper current of watching her father choose dignity over vindication for the 1,000th time. Morning arrived in Mountain View with traffic and the theater of ordinary life. CodeStream Solutions occupied a building identical to 1,000 other startups, open floor plans and cold brew on tap, and the persistent fiction that equity mattered more than salary. Ethan pulled into his assigned spot at 8:30, the Camry looking appropriately humbled beside Teslas whose owners were still paying off. The cubicle welcomed him with fluorescent indifference. Python code scrolled across dual monitors, elegant in its simplicity, deliberately modest in its ambition. Co-workers drifted through their routines, unaware they were working for the man who paid their salaries through shell corporations layered like nesting dolls. 11:30 became the excuse. Ethan stood, stretched, announced lunch to nobody in particular. The Camry turned left instead of right, drove 20 miles to San Francisco like a man with somewhere unremarkable to be. Salesforce Tower's underground garage swallowed the Toyota whole. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Ethan stepped into the private elevator, requiring a keycard most tenants didn't know existed. Numbers climbed. 40 floors became 50, became 58, each digit representing another layer of separation between who he was and who he pretended to be. The doors opened on silence and views that made arguments unnecessary. Thorn Capital Partners occupied the entire floor, glass walls framing the bay like evidence in a case for ambition. The Golden Gate cut orange across gray water. Angel Island sat patient in the distance, unmoved by the fortunes made and lost in the city surrounding it. Ethan pulled the MIT hoodie over his head, folded it with the care of a costume that still had performances left. The Loro Piana cashmere beneath whispered against skin that knew the difference between $1,400 and $14. Julia Winters materialized from her desk. Yale MBA and 6 years of keeping secrets that could destroy the fiction Ethan had built. Her greeting acknowledged the shift from theater to reality. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne. Your 9 o'clock became your noon. The board convenes in Conference A. Amazon acquisition proposal requires your decision. $1.2 billion. The number sat in the air like it belonged there. Eth Fantasies nodded, moved past her desk toward an office where San Francisco arranged itself like a promise being kept. The conference room held 12 chairs and 11 people who stood when he entered. Apex Financial's board represented $200 billion in collective net worth, but in this room, Ethan's 42% ownership made his vote the only one that truly mattered. He took his seat, and the others followed, like choreographed acknowledgement of hierarchy that money alone couldn't purchase. The presentation lasted 20 minutes. Amazon wanted a payment processing subsidiary. The numbers made sense. The strategy aligned. Ethan listened with the part of his mind that had built this empire, while the rest calculated how long he could maintain 2 lives before one consumed the other. Approve. Execute by Friday. He was back in Mountain View by 1:15, the hoodie restored, the Camry anonymous in afternoon traffic. His cubicle mate asked about lunch. Ethan mentioned a food truck, something with fish tacos, details that didn't matter because the best lies were the boring ones. 2 weeks later, Boston summoned them with the weight of family obligation. Les Belliers occupied real estate that announced itself through understatement. White tablecloths and sommeliers who remembered preferences across years. Richard Ashford had reserved a table that would seat 6, though only 4 chairs would fill, the empty spaces serving as reminders of expectations unmet. The interrogation began before appetizers arrived. "So, Ethan, still writing code?" Richard Ashford's question carried the tone of a man confirming what he already knew. Across the table, his daughter's husband sat in a J.Crew blazer that had seen better seasons, hair that needed cutting, the entire presentation of someone who'd settled for comfortable mediocrity instead of uncomfortable success. "Yes, sir. Payment encryption algorithms, primarily." The answer satisfied nobody. Richard exchanged a glance with Margaret, decades of marriage compressed into eyebrow movements that communicated volumes. Margaret's smile held the warmth of a quarterly earnings report. How quaint. Movement at a nearby table interrupted the execution. Blake Garrison approached with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. Goldman Sachs vice president, Brioni suit, the kind of handsome that came from genetics and personal trainers working in concert. He'd been 3 tables away, but proximity meant opportunity for men who collected connections. Victoria, delightful to see you. The greeting ignored Ethan for 3 full seconds before pivoting with calculated courtesy. Ethan, still coding? The repetition wasn't accident. Blake had asked the same question at a charity event 6 months prior, remembered the answer, filed it under categories not worth remembering. His attention returned to Victoria like water finding its level. We should discuss that CFO position. Lux next Tuesday? Richard Ashford leaned back, watching the interaction with 40 years of judging which investments to back. His daughter could do better than the engineer who wore discount blazers. Blake Garrison represented better. The mathematics were simple. Margaret's voice carried just loud enough to ensure the entire section heard. Victoria, darling, it's not too late. You're merely 37. You could still find someone suitable. The words landed between courses. Eaton's iPhone buzzed against his thigh, a lifeline wrapped in titanium. The message from Warren Morrison glowed beneath the table. Forbes requesting interview regarding your Apex stake. Declined per your standing instructions. Ethan silenced the phone. The smile he offered his in-laws carried the weight of a man who knew more than they would ever imagine. But the knowing cost him something that tallied in real time. Every dismissal, every casual contempt, every suggestion that he wasn't enough added weight to a scale he'd built himself. Later, he would wonder if testing people was its own kind of cruelty. But that night in Boston, watching his wife's family dissect his worth like a failed investment, Ethan thought only about Catherine. 9 years earlier, Catherine Thorne had died because she wanted a photograph. The specifics mattered less than the lesson learned in blood and twisted metal. They'd been married 3 years. Harper was 3. Ethan had just sold his first company for enough money to buy Maseratis, plural, and Catherine had wanted everyone to know about it. The Instagram influencer drove a Mercedes. Catherine drove faster. Big Sur's curves didn't forgive ambition, and the Maserati Gran Turismo became abstract art halfway down a cliff face. The coroner said she died instantly, which was supposed to comfort, but felt like waste. And 3 years ago, at a Stanford coffee shop, Victoria Ashford had walked into his carefully constructed poverty, carrying a briefcase and a future he'd let her believe they were building together. She'd been beautiful, in the way ambitious women often are, edges sharp enough to cut through mediocrity, intelligence that sparked during conversations about algorithmic trading. Eaton had dressed like a PhD student subsisting on ramen, and Victoria had seen through the costume to something she thought was potential. You possess remarkable insights. You should launch a venture. Her belief had felt like validation. For 8 months, they'd built something real. She'd loved the man in the hoodie. Or so he'd thought. The wedding in February 2022 had been small, personal, honest in every way except the one that mattered most. Ethan had lied about who he was, and 18 months later, Victoria had stopped pretending she loved who he pretended to be. August 2023 brought heat and fractures that could no longer be ignored. Victoria stood in their kitchen, expensive heels on cheap linoleum, frustration radiating like fever from someone who'd run out of patience. Ethan, when will you take risks? Launch your own company. The question assumed he hadn't. The assumption revealed everything that needed revealing. We could be wealthy if you possessed ambition. Wealth sat in accounts she'd never seen, invested in companies she'd never heard of, compound interest on a fortune she didn't know existed. But ambition required visibility, and Ethan had chosen invisibility the night Catherine died. I'm content with our life. Victoria's laugh carried edges sharp enough to draw blood. I am not. I'm 37. My peers are partners, VPs, residing in penthouses. I'm in a modest rental with a developer. The words were designed to hurt. They succeeded, but not in ways she intended. Ethan heard them and understood that the test was failing, that his wife valued appearance over substance, that 9 years of hiding had finally produced the data point he'd feared finding. October 2023 brought Blake Garrison into focus as more than a networking contact. The affair started the way these things do. Lunch meetings running long, conference calls requiring in-person follow-ups, the gradual erosion of boundaries that married people pretend are reinforced steel. Ethan knew within a week. Victoria's phone habits changed, her schedule developed gaps, and the way she said Blake's name carried heat his own name had lost somewhere between the wedding and now. He said nothing. Testing required patience. November brought Harper's school fundraiser at Harker, where Silicon Valley's elite gathered to prove their wealth served education. The ballroom glittered with charity that came with gift bags worth more than most people's monthly rent. Victoria wore Chanel, Ethan wore J. Crew. The contrast wasn't subtle. A woman whose husband had founded something now worth billions approached with champagne and condescension in equal measure. Victoria, your husband works in technology. The phrasing made it a question, as if employment in tech might be rumor rather than verified fact. Victoria's smile tightened at the corners. He's a software engineer. Another parent materialized. Jewelry worth more than cars. Oh well, someone must write the code. The laughter that followed held the specific cruelty of people who'd never worried about money, mocking those who had to. Blake Garrison chose that moment to make his entrance. Brioni's suit and a smile that sold confidence by the metric ton. His presence demanded acknowledgement. Victoria, delightful seeing you. The greeting held subtext anyone paying attention could decode. Victoria's posture shifted, shoulders back, chin up, the physical language of a woman remembering she had options. Ethan, still coding? The question had become Blake's signature dismissal, reducing another man's worth to a single insufficient variable. Ethan nodded, offered nothing, watched the interaction unfold with the detachment of a researcher observing his own experiment conclude. We should discuss that CFO position. Lunch next Tuesday? Victoria's agreement came too quick, too eager. Across the ballroom, Harper witnessed the entire exchange. At 11, she understood more than adults assumed. Her hand found her father's, squeezed hard enough to communicate everything words couldn't. Dad, I despise her. She's ashamed of you. The word choice mattered. Despise, not dislike. Ashamed, not embarrassed. Harper had her father's precision with language, and the precision cut clean. They found privacy in a hallway lined with portraits of former headmasters, dead white men who'd never questioned their worth. Ethan knelt, brought himself to his daughter's eye level, searching for words that wouldn't require explanations he wasn't ready to give. Harper, authentic love isn't contingent upon wealth. But Harper was 11 and brilliant and exhausted from watching her father accept less than he deserved. Then why don't you reveal your true identity? The question had an answer that lived in a hospital room 9 years ago, in a Maserati at the bottom of a cliff. In every decision Ethan had made to protect his daughter from money's corrosive properties. But 11-year-olds needed simpler truths. Because then I'll never know if she loves me or my fortune. Harper's expression cycled through understanding, rage at a system requiring such tests, settling finally into resigned wisdom that children learn too early when fairness proves to be fiction. January 2024 brought rain and revelation. Ethan returned home at 2 in the afternoon, claiming illness that was really strategy. The house sat quiet, or should have been. Voices drifted from the master bedroom. Victoria's laugh mixing with Blake's baritone in harmonies that didn't belong in Ethan's house. The FaceTime call played on Victoria's laptop, propped on the dresser, Blake's face filling the screen. Neither noticed Ethan in the hallway, iPhone recording everything. Blake's voice carried casual confidence. "Once you divorce him, we launch the IPO immediately. Your engineer husband has brilliant concepts in those notebooks by his desk. I photographed them during Thanksgiving. We'll leverage those payment algorithms." Victoria's response came practiced, rehearsed, the tone of someone who'd had this conversation multiple times. "Ethan is excessively passive to notice. He'll sign whatever I present." The notebooks in question sat exactly where Ethan had left them, spiral-bound and filled with algorithms that looked revolutionary to anyone who didn't understand they were simplified decoys. The real work, the actual innovations worth billions, existed in patents filed 2 years prior. But Blake and Victoria didn't know that. They saw treasure left unguarded. "Perfect. We'll launch StreamPay Financial, utilizing his innovations, and you'll be CEO. He'll remain oblivious." The plan was thorough. The arrogance was complete. And the recording would later serve purposes they couldn't imagine, standing in that moment proud of their theft, confident in their victim's ignorance. Ethan stepped into the bedroom, with the calm of someone who'd expected this, but still felt the impact. Victoria's laptop snapped shut. Blake's face disappeared mid-sentence. The silence that followed held every truth their marriage had avoided. "Ethan, you're home early?" Victoria's panic lasted 3 seconds before morphing into something sharper. Defense became offense in real time, her voice rising with the pitch of someone who'd decided attack was the better strategy. "So what? You lack ambition. Blake can actualize those ideas. You merely code for 160,000 annually like a—" She caught herself, but the pause said everything the completed sentence would have. "Like what, Victoria?" The question hung between them, daring her to finish, to say aloud what her silence confirmed. Victoria's jaw set, and when the word came, it carried 2 years' accumulated disappointment. "Like a failure." Blake's voice emerged from the closed laptop, tinny but insistent. "Victoria, disconnect. I'll handle this legally." But Ethan had already moved past anger into the clarity that comes when tests conclude and results arrive definitive. His voice came quiet, final. The tone of a man who'd gotten the answer he'd dreaded finding. "Victoria, I want a divorce." The words rearranged the room's gravity. Victoria's face cycled through shock to calculation to something that might have been fear if pride hadn't buried it. "What?" "I'll make it simple. Take the house, the car, everything. I want nothing." The offer made no sense to a woman who'd spent 2 years cataloguing her husband's failures. Men didn't walk away from assets without leverage, without anger, without the grinding negotiation that turned marriages into business disputes. Ethan's calm felt wrong, unnatural. The behavior of someone playing a game whose rules Victoria didn't understand. But she took the offer anyway. February 15th arrived gray and cold, winter clinging to Northern California with the persistence of bad decisions. Morrison and Associates occupied professional space that charged by the hour, and the emotional damage. The conference room's windows framed Palo Alto in shades of expensive regret. Victoria's attorney was someone named Whitmore, Yale Law, and a billing rate suggesting competence, or at least its appearance. He laid out the settlement with the efficiency of someone who'd divided hundreds of marriages into their component assets. Mrs. Thorne is entitled to 50% of marital assets under California law. Ethan's interruption came soft, but absolute. "She may have everything. I want nothing." The lawyers exchanged glances, silent communication between professionals encountering deviation from script. Whitmore leaned toward Victoria, stage whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "He's being foolish. Take it all. The assets totaled $425,000. The house Ethan owned but pretended to rent, the cars, the furniture, the accumulated detritus of 2 years performing middle-class life for an audience of one. Victoria signed where indicated, Mont Blanc pen moving across paper with the confidence of someone who'd won a negotiation she didn't understand she'd lost. Ethan signed opposite, his signature unchanged since filing his first patent, the one that made his first million, the foundation of everything Victoria was stealing, without knowing how little she was taking. Standing hurt more than signing. Ethan rose, looked at the woman he'd married and tested and learned from, offered words that meant more than she could know. I hope Blake provides you happiness. I hope you acquire everything you desire. The corridor outside smelled like carpet cleaner and concluded business. Ethan pulled his iPhone from his pocket, typed 4 words that would set machinery in motion Victoria couldn't imagine. The message went to Warren Morrison, 69 years old and 4,000 miles away in Wyoming, but present in every way that mattered. It's time. Activate Phase 2. Timeline 10 months. Her IPO will be our revelation. Warren's response arrived before Ethan reached the elevator. Confirmed. Begin preparation. The doors closed on Palo Alto and opened on San Francisco. Thorne Capital Partners welcomed him back, with Julia's assessment of what came next, board meetings and legal strategies and careful construction of a revelation that would arrive with the force of inevitability. But first, Ethan drove the Camry to Pacific Heights, to the $18 million penthouse he actually lived in when performance ended. Harper met him at the door, backpack abandoned, 11 years of worry compressed into a single question. Is it done? Ethan nodded, pulled his daughter close, felt the weight of a test concluded, and a future narrowing toward confrontation he'd been building for 9 years. It's done, sweetheart. Now we prepare. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, San Francisco sprawled in every direction, millions of lives intersecting in patterns that made sense only from altitude. Somewhere in the city below, Victoria was celebrating freedom, planning her future with Blake, building a company on stolen ideas that were never real to begin with. The trap had been set 18 months ago, the bait had been taken, and now time would do what time does best, carrying everyone toward moments they couldn't avoid and wouldn't survive unchanged. Ethan opened his laptop, pulled up Apex financial projections, began the work of accelerating an IPO that would arrive the same month as Victoria's. 2 companies going public within weeks, one built on genuine innovation and the other constructed from theft and arrogance, and the mistaken belief that Ethan Thorne was exactly who he pretended to be. 10 months stretched ahead like a road with a visible ending. The destination was fixed. Only the journey remained. Harper appeared at his shoulder, watched numbers scroll across the screen, understood more than most adults about the cost of testing whether love could survive without money's corrupting weight. Will it hurt her, Dad, when everyone finds out? The question deserved honesty, even when honesty wounded. Ethan closed the laptop, looked at his daughter, saw Catherine's eyes and his own stubborn insistence on truth. Yes, it will hurt her terribly. Good. The word came simple, final. The moral clarity of a child who'd watched her father diminished and was ready to watch him restored. Ethan should have corrected her, explained that revenge wasn't the goal, that truth mattered more than pain. But Harper was 11 and brilliant, and tired of watching her father accept less than he deserved. So instead, he held her, and together they watched city lights ignite as darkness claimed the bay. Each point of illumination a life being lived, a choice being made, a future narrowing toward the moment when everything hidden would flood into light and 600 people would learn that the man Victoria Ashford had divorced as a failure was worth $9 billion and coming to her IPO to prove it. 4 days after signing papers that divided nothing of consequence, Ethan Thorne drove his Toyota Camry through morning traffic that moved with the sluggish rhythm of routine. The underground garage at 181 Fremont swallowed the car whole, concrete and shadow replacing daylight. He parked in a spot marked for building management, killed the engine, sat in silence broken only by cooling metal's tick. The transformation happened in stages, each layer removed revealing the person beneath. Mitt hoodie came off first, folded with precision that suggested costume rather than clothing. Beneath it, Brunello Cucinelli cashmere and charcoal gray whispered against skin. Levi's gave way to Ermenegildo Zegna wool that held a crease through board meetings and turbulence. The JanSport backpack, fraying at one strap, disappeared into the trunk. The Hermes briefcase that replaced it cost more than Victoria thought they'd spent on furniture in 2 years of marriage. The private elevator required a keycard most tenants didn't know existed. 62 floors climbed in silence, numbers ascending toward the life Ethan actually lived when performance ended. The doors opened on glass and views that made arguments obsolete. Thorne Capital Partners occupied space the way empires occupied territory, with quiet certainty of ownership that didn't announce itself. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Golden Gate in orange suspension. The bay spread silver beneath February sky. Julia Winters stood from her desk as Ethan entered. 8 years of maintaining the fiction that her boss was someone named Marcus who coded for startups. Her greeting acknowledged the shift from pretense to reality. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne. Your 9 o'clock became your noon. Apex Financial Board convenes in Conference A. 11:30. Sequoia Capital wants to discuss Series E positioning. 2 o'clock. Forbes declined as instructed, but Wall Street Journal is now requesting the anonymous billionaire profile." The day's architecture revealed itself in calendar blocks, each representing millions in motion or billions at rest. Ethan moved past her desk toward his office, where San Francisco arranged itself like a model of ambition realized. "Decline the journal. Anonymity serves its purpose until it doesn't." Julia's fingers moved across her keyboard, closing doors that would stay closed until December made opening them strategic. Behind Ethan, she added a final note with the timing of someone who knew which battles to pick. "Sir, they're offering the feature article, front page of the business section." Ethan paused at his office threshold, looked back at the assistant who'd kept his secrets since he'd hired her away from Goldman with an offer that made refusing financially irresponsible. Not yet. Conference Room A held 14 chairs and 13 people who stood when Ethan entered. The board of Apex Financial Technologies represented wealth measuring in hundreds of billions collectively. But in this room, Ethan's 42% ownership made his voice the one that mattered when consensus fractured. He took his seat at the table's head, and the others followed like choreographed acknowledgement of hierarchy that money alone couldn't buy. Jonathan Rivers ran Apex as CEO, with competence Ethan had hired him to provide 6 years earlier. Tall, silver-haired, Georgetown MBA, and 20 years at American Express, building the kind of resume that made investors comfortable. He ran the company Ethan had founded in 2010, with the first $50 million earned selling encryption protocols to companies that would later become household names. Rivers opened his presentation with numbers telling a story of readiness. Q4 2023 revenue hit $3.8 billion, up 42% year over year. Market penetration in mobile payments increased 17%. Corporate clients grew by 230, including 3 Fortune 100 additions. All metrics indicate we're prepared for public offering. Sarah Blackwell, CFO, and the only person in the room who'd been with Apex since the beginning, advanced the slide deck to valuation models. Conservative, moderate, optimistic scenarios arranged themselves in columns, starting at 18 billion and climbing to 24. Your stake, Mr. Thorne, at 42% equity, values between 7.5 and 10 billion, depending on market reception. The number sat in the room like a guest everyone knew was coming, but whose presence still altered atmosphere. $10 billion sounded like fiction, even to people who traded in billions. Ethan Transit let the silence extend, watched faces process implications of going public with a company most of the world didn't know he controlled. IPO timeline? Rivers exchanged glances with Blackwell, a silent consultation ending with him leaning forward, hands clasped on mahogany reflecting overhead lighting. Originally, we projected 18 months. Aggressive preparation could accelerate to 12. We'd need to compress due diligence, expedite SEC filings, push the roadshow into condensed schedule. Sarah Blackwell interjected, her voice carrying the precision that had made her indispensable. Compressing to 10 months means we'd target December, matching the competitor's timeline you mentioned. Ethan's response came without hesitation. Accelerate to 10 months. I have personal motivations for urgency. The statement landed among board members with weight of information they weren't receiving. Personal motivations didn't typically drive IPO timelines for companies valued in tens of billions, but Ethan Thorne's personal motivations had built this company from concept to infrastructure. So questions died before forming. Warren Morrison spoke from his position 3 seats down, Wyoming drawl carrying authority of a man who'd run Lockheed Martin before retiring to raise horses and invest in founders he believed in. 70 years sat easy on shoulders that had carried more weight than most people would see in lifetimes. Ethan, private word? The adjacent conference room offered privacy Morrison requested. Glass walls showed San Francisco continuing its business without them, oblivious to decisions being made in climate-controlled isolation. Morrison closed the door with deliberate care of someone about to say things that needed containing. You're rushing the IPO. This concerns Victoria. The name hung between them, explanation and accusation both. Ethan walked to the windows, hands in pockets, watching a container ship navigate beneath the Golden Gate toward Oakland's port facilities. She's launching a competitor, StreamPay Financial, using concepts stolen from the decoy notebooks I left accessible. Morrison's laugh carried no humor. Revenge? The question deserved better than simple denial. Ethan turned from the view, met eyes of the man who'd believed in him, when belief meant writing checks most people would never see. Truth. She believes she married insignificance. The world deserves to know who actually built Apex Financial. When will you reveal yourself? At her IPO. Blake is launching StreamPay in December, 10 months from now, identical to our Apex timeline. Morrison processed this with strategic assessment that had made him legendary in defense contracting. The timing wasn't coincidence. The parallel timelines would create comparison favoring truth over theft, and the public nature of an IPO would make revelation impossible to contain or spin. You're weaponizing transparency. Ethan's smile held winter cold outside the windows. I'm revealing what was always true. If that destroys what she's built on lies, the destruction is hers. March arrived in San Francisco with relentless sunshine that made Victoria's move to Blake's penthouse feel like ascending to proper altitude. The Millennium Tower stretched 58 floors above the financial district, each floor costing more than most people earned in lifetimes. Blake's unit occupied the 52nd, $12 million of glass and Italian marble and views reducing the city to a model of itself. Victoria's belongings filled half a closet. The rest was Blake's. Brioni suits and Tom Ford casual wear, and accumulated wardrobe of a man who'd never questioned whether he belonged in rooms where wealth was assumed. She hung her Chanel in space he'd cleared, arranged shoes on shelves that had held his collection, felt satisfaction of arrival after years in suburban exile. Blake emerged from his office, phone pressed to ear, conversation with someone in New York about market conditions and optimal timing. He covered the receiver, gestured toward photocopied notebooks spread across the dining table, seating 12, but usually feeding 2. These payment algorithms are revolutionary. Ed and Ethan never monetized them. Victoria looked at her ex-husband's handwriting, careful notation that had always impressed her when she'd still wanted to be impressed. The algorithms addressed security vulnerabilities in mobile payments, blockchain verification, fraud detection at scale. To someone like Blake, who understood finance but not code, they looked like foundation of a billion-dollar company waiting to be built. We'll construct StreamPay around these. You'll be CEO. The title felt like vindication. CEO of a fintech startup, backed by Blake's connections and her strategic vision and algorithms, Ethan had been too passive to capitalize on. Victoria traced her finger along a margin note. Ethan's shorthand for error-checking protocols. Felt nothing resembling guilt. What if Ethan discovers? Blake's laugh carried confidence of a man who'd never lost a meaningful confrontation. What can he do? Sue us with his $160,000 salary? The question was rhetorical. The answer, obvious. But what neither of them knew, standing in $12 million of luxury built on Goldman bonuses and family money, was that Blake Garrison had spent 15 years at Goldman watching people like Ethan, people with actual talent, build things, while he took credit for orchestrating. The resentment had calcified into a philosophy. The world belonged to people who took, not people who created. And Victoria represented his chance to finally be the builder instead of the intermediary. April transformed into May, transformed into June, and Victoria's Instagram documented the ascent with precision of someone who'd spent years performing a life she wanted rather than living one she had. The photos told their own story to followers who'd watched her marriage to a software engineer with polite sympathy people reserve for friends making questionable choices. The French Laundry at sunset, Victoria in Alexander McQueen and Blake in custom tailoring, wine costing more than Ethan's monthly car payment. The caption read, "Finally with someone who matches my ambition," followed by a diamond emoji sparkling with all the subtlety Victoria had abandoned. Comments flooded in with enthusiasm of people who loved watching success stories, confirming their own biases. "You look radiant. That engineer was restraining you." "Blake is gorgeous and accomplished. Ultimate upgrade." Victoria's reply came quick, practiced, the social media voice she'd perfected during consulting years, when personal branding determined advancement. "Sometimes you must jettison dead weight to soar." The helicopter photo over Napa Valley in May showed her hair wind-tossed and perfect, Blake's arm around her waist, vineyards spreading beneath them like confirmation that altitude mattered. Upgraded living, with a sparkle emoji and the hashtag StreamPayCEO, because the company was real now, incorporated and funded, and building toward the IPO that would prove Victoria's father wrong about everything he'd said across 37 years. By June, the charity gala at the De Young Museum provided setting for Victoria's most deliberate post. The dress was Valentino, the jewelry borrowed from a friend whose husband founded something that sold to Google. Blake stood beside her in the photo, handsome and successful and everything Richard Ashford had wanted for his daughter, instead of the software engineer who'd embarrassed them at family dinners. Success attracts success. July brought StreamPay Financial's first serious funding round. The office Blake had leased occupied the 38th floor of a financial district tower, open floor plan and standing desks, and aesthetic of disruption that investors expected from companies claiming to revolutionize payments. Victoria's title was official now, printed on business cards identifying her as co-founder and CEO, the legitimacy she'd craved since watching her father dismiss her accomplishments as insufficient. The pitch to venture capitalists had been refined through a dozen practice sessions. Victoria delivered it with confidence of someone who'd spent years presenting to skeptical executives at Deloitte, her background in strategic consulting lending credibility to claims about market gaps and scalable solutions. Thomas Bradford from Greylock Partners sat across the conference table, expression giving nothing away while Victoria walked through StreamPay's security architecture. The algorithms addressed fraud detection, mobile transaction verification, blockchain integration for cryptocurrency payments. They were impressive because they were Ethan's, simplified but still sophisticated enough to solve problems costing financial institutions billions annually. This payment security framework is groundbreaking. Where did you develop this? The question was the one Victoria had prepared for, inevitable inquiry about technical credentials she didn't actually possess. Her answer came smooth, rehearsed, confident fabrication that worked when belief mattered more than verification. I've developed this over 5 years. My background in Deloitte strategic consulting provided unique insights into fintech vulnerabilities that technical teams often miss. Bradford's phone was already out, fingers moving across screen with practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to verify everything before writing checks. His pause lasted 3 seconds too long. I don't observe technical background in your profile. Blake intervened before Victoria could formulate response, voice carrying easy authority of someone who'd spent 15 years managing perceptions for Goldman clients. Victoria is a visionary. She doesn't need to code. She perceives the macro picture that pure engineers miss. That's why StreamPay will succeed, where technical-first companies plateau. The explanation worked because it aligned with what Bradford wanted to believe. Female tech CEOs played well in portfolio companies. Strategic vision from consulting backgrounds provided business discipline, balancing technical brilliance, and the algorithms themselves were sophisticated enough to overcome questions about their origin. Bradford's smile returned. Decision made. Acceptable. We're committing $60 million for Series A. The celebration happened in Blake's penthouse that night. Champagne costing $400 a bottle, and intoxication of validation that money alone couldn't buy. Victoria stood at windows overlooking San Francisco. The city spread beneath her like territory conquered through intelligence and ambition, rather than passive acceptance Ethan had offered. Blake came up behind her, reflection visible in glass, arms sliding around her waist with possessive certainty of a man who'd won something he'd wanted. 10 months until IPO. We'll each be worth $600 million. The number felt real in ways that her marriage never had. $600 million was vindication, proof. The kind of success that would make her father finally acknowledge she'd built something that mattered. And knowing that Ethan would eventually learn about it made the victory sharper. I cannot wait to see Ethan's reaction when he realizes I succeeded without him. Blake's laugh vibrated against her back. He'll probably send a congratulations email asking if we're hiring. The joke landed because they both believed it. Ethan Thorne was a software engineer who'd walked away from $400,000 in divorce assets. A man so passive he'd rather have nothing than fight for his share. The idea that he might have resources or connections or any capacity for response beyond wounded pride seemed absurd to people who measured power in Goldman bonuses and Series A funding rounds. August found Ethan in his actual residence, $18 million of Pacific Heights real estate that Harper had lived in her entire life. The kitchen's marble island cost more than the house in Palo Alto where Ethan had performed his marriage. Harper sat there now, Homework spread across stone quarried in Italy and installed by craftsmen who charged by the hour in 4 figures. Her phone showed Victoria's Instagram, carefully curated life sparkling with borrowed jewelry and Blake's money. Harper's expression carried particular disgust, children reserved for adults who've proven themselves disappointing. "Have you seen Victoria's Instagram?" Ethan was making dinner, fresh pasta and sauce requiring technique learned from a chef he'd hired to teach him basics when Catherine died and left him responsible for feeding a 3-year-old. His answer came without looking up from the pan. "No, sweetheart." Harper turned the phone around anyway, showed him the helicopter photo and charity gala and French Laundry sunset. Evidence of Victoria's upgraded life, each image a small knife twisted in the assumption that Ethan cared about her happiness with someone else. "Aren't you furious?" The question assumed anger was appropriate response. Ethan tasted the sauce, adjusted seasoning, considered how to explain peace to an 11-year-old who wanted justice in simpler terms. "I'm at peace. She's revealing her authentic character to the world." "When will you reveal your authentic identity?" Soon sounded like a promise he'd been making for months. Harper deserved better than vague timelines, but specifics would make her complicit in ways that seemed unfair to someone still in 6th grade. "Very soon." She set down her phone, looked at him with eyes that had watched her father accept diminishment for 2 years, and were ready for the performance to end. "Will people be mean to you when they find out you tested her?" The question struck deeper than anger ever could. Testing Victoria had seemed reasonable in the abstract, a way to ensure love survived without money's corruption. But explaining to his daughter that he'd deliberately built a trap and watched someone he'd married walk into it revealed cruelty inherent in the entire design. "Perhaps. But you'll understand why Daddy needed to know if love was real." Harper's expression suggested she already understood more than he wanted her to. That 11 was old enough to recognize that testing people made you the kind of person who valued being right over being kind. But she just nodded and returned to homework while Ethan finished cooking, and they ate dinner in silence that would look peaceful to anyone who wasn't listening. September brought Natasha Blackwell to San Francisco on a red-eye from New York, her presence in Thorne Capital's conference room carrying weight of reputation that preceded formal introduction. 52 years old, Sullivan and Cromwell partnership, 0 losses in intellectual property theft cases over a 20-year career that had made her expensive and worth every dollar. She didn't spread documents immediately. Instead, she pulled up a chair across from Ethan, leaned back, and studied him with the assessment of a surgeon evaluating a patient before proposing a procedure. "Mr. Thorne, before we discuss legal strategy, I need to understand your goal, because there are 3 ways to handle IP theft of this magnitude, and which one we choose determines whether you're seeking justice, revenge, or simply correction of the public record." Ethan appreciated the directness. Too many lawyers assumed they knew what clients wanted. "What are the 3 ways?" Natasha counted on her fingers. "Option 1. We sue now. File for immediate injunction, prevent StreamPay from launching. They settle, you get licensing fees, maybe 50 to 100 million. Clean, fast, boring. Option 2. We wait until after their IPO launches successfully. Stock soars, then we reveal the theft. Maximum financial damage. SEC gets involved, but you look vindictive." "Option 3? She paused, pulled out her laptop, opened it to reveal patent filings, code comparisons, evidence she'd been accumulating for weeks. "Option 3. We let them ring the bell. Let Victoria have her moment of triumph. Then, 17 minutes into trading, we file emergency injunction with evidence so overwhelming that the halt isn't about allegations, it's about documented fraud. The stock tanks. The SEC investigates, and you walk into that building as yourself, not as the man she dismissed." Ethan studied the evidence on her screen. The decoy notebooks he'd created, StreamPay's pitch deck, code samples matching his fakes with 97% accuracy. Every piece of the trap he'd set 2 years ago, when he'd first suspected Victoria's contempt, might curdle into betrayal. Option 3, he said quietly. But not for revenge. For truth. Natasha's smile suggested she'd heard this distinction before, from clients who needed to believe their motivations were purer than outcomes. Mr. Thorne, when we execute option 3, the result will be total destruction of her company, her reputation, and possibly her freedom, if the DOJ decides to prosecute. If that's not revenge, what is it? The question deserved honesty, even when honesty revealed things about himself Ethan had been avoiding. It's revelation. She stole from me because she thought I was insignificant. I'm not asking you to punish her. I'm asking you to reveal what she actually did, and let consequences follow naturally. Natasha studied him for a long moment, then nodded. We file December 17th, 9:47 a.m. Eastern, 17 minutes after opening bell. That maximizes trading volume before the halt, which maximizes the number of people who'll be paying attention when the truth comes out. And President Blake Garrison as we make history. December 17th, 2024, 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The personal note came on separate cardstock, Victoria's handwriting instantly recognizable, despite the years. Ethan, despite our past, I wanted you to witness what genuine ambition accomplishes. Perhaps it will inspire you. Victoria. Harper read over his shoulder, breath catching with particular outrage children feel when adults prove themselves smaller than expected. She sent you this? The invitation was cruelty disguised as magnanimity, an offer to witness her triumph that assumed Ethan would be diminished by the viewing. Victoria wanted him in the audience when she rang the bell, wanted him to see what she'd built without him, wanted satisfaction of proving her father right about the engineer who'd never amount to anything. She wants me to witness her triumph. Harper's next question came careful, testing whether her father's peace was genuine or performance. Are you attending? Ethan walked to the safe, hidden behind a painting Catherine had bought, before ambition killed her. The combination opened on stacks of documents most people would never accumulate, deeds and patents and corporate filings. He pulled out a Forbes magazine from March 2023, cover promising revelation about America's most anonymous billionaire. The article inside speculated about a mysterious investor behind Apex Financial, a phantom of Silicon Valley who'd built a fortune while refusing every interview, every profile, every attempt to attach a name to wealth. The piece got close to truth without reaching it, quoted board members who praised the chairman's vision without naming him, analyzed investment patterns suggesting someone with rare patience. But Ethan's name appeared nowhere, his identity protected by NDAs and careful corporate structures, and 9 years of refusing to let the world know who he actually was. He showed Harper the magazine, watched her read the cover story, saw the moment understanding arrived. You're famous, and nobody knows. The observation was exactly right. Ethan Thorne existed in Forbes speculation and Wall Street Journal analysis, and Bloomberg profiles that called him the Phantom because phantom was easier than admission that someone could be worth billions while living like he made 6 figures. They're about to. December 10th found Ethan at Tom Ford's San Francisco flagship, a master tailor measuring him with precision normally reserved for heads of state. The suit was Windsor 3-piece in charcoal, $9,500 of fabric and construction that would announce wealth without declaring it. The Patek Philippe Nautilus came from the safe where it had lived since 2015, purchased the month after Catherine's funeral, and never worn, because $18,000 on his wrist felt like tempting the same fate that had killed her. The transformation in the dressing room mirror showed a man Victoria had never met. Not the engineer in hoodies and cheap blazers, but someone who belonged in boardrooms where billions moved on handshakes. The Berluti Oxfords cost more than their entire honeymoon. The Hermes tie could have paid a month's rent on the house where they'd pretended to be middle class. Ethan looked at himself and saw truth emerging from disguise he'd worn for 9 years. This was who he'd always been underneath the performance. And tomorrow, 600 people would learn it simultaneously. December 16th began before dawn. The Gulfstream waited at San Jose International, fueled and ready for the kind of cross-country flight that turned 5 hours into a demonstration of distance between classes. Harper climbed stairs ahead of him, overnight bag small enough to carry, excitement barely contained by the early hour. The cabin smelled like leather and possibility. Captain Reynolds appeared from the cockpit, former Air Force, and the kind of pilot who charged enough to make civilian aviation worthwhile. "Mr. Thorne, cleared for takeoff. New York in 4.5 hours. Harper settled into a seat that cost more than most people's cars, looked at her father with an expression he'd seen before. The night Catherine died. The day he'd decided to hide his wealth. Every moment when choice narrowed toward irreversibility. "Dad, I'm nervous." The admission deserved acknowledgement. Ethan sat across from her, cabin configured for conversation rather than solitary work that usually filled these flights. "Why, sweetheart? What if she doesn't care? What if she simply laughs?" The fear was reasonable. Victoria might not care that she'd divorced a billionaire if she was about to become one herself. The revelation might land as curiosity rather than devastation, interesting gossip rather than life-altering truth. Harper's worry was that her father had built this entire confrontation on assumptions about Victoria's capacity for regret. "I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing this so the world knows truth. And so you know your father was never the failure she claimed." The explanation satisfied, or at least silenced. Harper nodded, pulled out her iPad, lost herself in whatever 11-year-olds found compelling, while their fathers flew across the country to detonate their ex-wives' careers. The engines spooled up, the Gulfstream accelerated down the runway, and San Jose fell away beneath them like a life left behind. At 35,000 feet, somewhere over Nevada, Ethan pulled out his phone and composed the text that would set machinery in motion Victoria couldn't stop or even see until it crushed her. The message went to Natasha Blackwell, probably asleep in her apartment on the Upper East Side, definitely prepared to execute, regardless of hour. "I'm en route. File the injunction tomorrow, precisely 9:47 a.m. Eastern, 17 minutes after opening bell. Maximize trading volume before halt." Her response arrived before the flight attendant could offer beverages. "Confirmed. The world changes tomorrow, Mr. Thorne." The video call with Warren Morrison happened an hour later, Wyoming appearing on screen with clarity of satellite connections that made distance irrelevant to people who could afford the bandwidth. Warren sat in his ranch office, bookshelves filled with military history and business biography, accumulated wisdom of 70 years that had included combat and corporate leadership and the kind of success that made retirement optional. "Final confirmation, Ethan. Once you execute this, your anonymous existence ends. Forbes, Wall Street Journal, CNBC, everyone will know." The warning was unnecessary, but appreciated. Warren had been there when Ethan founded Apex, had written the first check when the company was concept and ambition, had kept the secret for 14 years while the fortune grew. His concern was genuine, even if outcome was inevitable. "I've been hiding 9 years. It's time." Warren's nod carried approval, mixed with something that looked like relief. "What about Harper?" Ethan glanced at his daughter, asleep now in the cabin's back section, her face peaceful in ways it hadn't been since Victoria entered their lives. She deserved a father who didn't hide, who stood proud of what he'd built, who showed her that competence mattered more than performance of modesty. She deserves a father who doesn't hide, who stands proud of what he built. The words felt true in ways that testing Victoria had never quite managed. This wasn't about revenge, or justice, or even truth. It was about showing Harper that her father was worth more than the world had been allowed to know. Warren's final words came quiet. Advice from a man who'd fought wars and built companies, and understood that some bridges burned because they were supposed to. Then make it count, son. Truth is the most powerful weapon. But Ethan's response came from a different place, a distinction that mattered, even if outcomes looked identical. This isn't about weapons, Warren. It's about integrity. The call ended. The Gulf Stream carried them east through darkness, toward morning and New York, and the moment when everything hidden would flood into light. Harper slept through crossing into Mountain Time, into Central, into Eastern zones, where Victoria was probably also sleeping, confident in her triumph, unaware that the world was about to shift beneath her in ways she couldn't imagine or prepare for. Ethan watched America scroll past beneath them, state borders invisible from this altitude, the entire country reduced to lights and darkness and spaces in between. Somewhere down there, Victoria was dreaming about ringing the opening bell. Blake was probably reviewing talking points for media interviews. StreamPay's investors were calculating returns on $60 million that would soon be worth nothing. And tomorrow, at 9:47 Eastern, Natasha Blackwell would file documents that would stop trading and shatter illusions, and prove that truth, when it arrived with proper documentation, was the most destructive force available to people who'd built empires on lies. The Gulf Stream began its descent toward Teterboro as dawn broke over New Jersey, the skyline of Manhattan rising in the distance like a promise about to be kept or broken, depending on who was watching. December 17th arrived in New York with cold that made breath visible and reminded everyone that winter owned the city, regardless of what happened inside climate-controlled towers. The New York Stock Exchange opened its doors at 7 a.m. for preparation, security sweeps, and media setup, and orchestrated chaos that preceded moments designed to look spontaneous on camera. Victoria and Blake's limousine arrived at 7:30. Black paint reflecting morning light off buildings that had witnessed 1,000 similar arrivals. Photographers lined the sidewalk despite the hour, cameras ready for the ritual of success that IPO days provided. Victoria emerged in red Armani, $12,000 of fabric and tailoring that announced arrival without apology. Blake followed in Brioni, his hand finding the small of her back with possessive certainty of a man who'd won something worth displaying. The questions came immediately, reporters shouting over each other with practiced aggression of people who needed quotes before deadlines. "Victoria! How does it feel being the youngest female fintech CEO to go public?" Her answer had been rehearsed for weeks, refined through media coaching that cost 5 figures and produced sound bites designed for evening news consumption. "I'm proving that women can architect technological empires when given the opportunity and resources." Another voice, this one from Bloomberg, cut through the noise with specific inquiry Victoria had prepared for most carefully. What inspired StreamPay's security framework? The lie came smooth, confident, backed by $60 million in Series A funding that served as validation for anyone questioning credentials. Years of strategic analysis. I identified critical gaps in payment security infrastructure that traditional tech companies overlooked because they prioritized speed over protection. Blake's voice joined hers. The duet they'd practiced, sounding natural enough for cameras that wouldn't catch rehearsal beneath spontaneity. Victoria is a visionary. We're honored to bring this innovation to market and demonstrate what happens when strategic thinking meets technical execution. The crowd absorbed this with enthusiasm of people who wanted to believe in female tech founders and disruption narratives. Nobody asked about the algorithm's origin. Nobody questioned why a consultant with no coding background had suddenly become an expert in payment security. The story was too good to fact-check before the bell rang. Inside, the VIP lounge overlooked the trading floor from height that made brokers look like pieces on a board game. Victoria's parents had flown in the previous night, Richard and Margaret Ashford, arriving with self-satisfaction of people whose daughter was about to prove their judgment correct. They stood near the champagne service, already holding flutes despite the early hour, entitled to celebration by virtue of having survived parenthood of someone successful. Margaret's voice carried across the room with projection developed over decades of charity galas and country club events. "Victoria, darling, such immense pride. Imagine if you'd remained with that engineer." The comparison was deliberate, a final knife in the marriage Margaret had opposed from the beginning. Richard joined his wife with a smile, suggesting vindication tasted better than the moët someone had poured too early. "Blake is a proper partner. This outcome is what you always deserved." Blake accepted the compliment with grace of someone accustomed to approval from men who measured worth in Goldman titles and family money. His arm stayed around Victoria's waist, claiming her in front of her parents and the room full of investors who'd written checks based on algorithms she'd stolen. The display screens positioned throughout the lounge showed StreamPay's ticker symbol waiting to go live. STRM. Opening price projected at $44 per share. Valuation at $5.2 billion. Victoria's 28% stake translating to $1.46 billion. Blake's 35% worth $1.82 billion. Numbers that would transform them from successful to wealthy in the 9 minutes between preparation and execution. Across town, a black Cadillac Escalade navigated morning traffic with patient certainty of a driver who'd been paid enough to ensure arrival regardless of conditions. Ethan sat in the back, Tom Ford's suit immaculate despite early departure from the hotel in Tribeca. Harper occupied the seat beside him, navy dress chosen for occasions requiring looking older than 11. Her expression carrying mix of excitement and fear that came with watching parents execute plans children couldn't fully understand. The Escalade pulled to the curb outside the exchange at 8:50, early enough to avoid the media circus that would intensify as opening bell approached. Ethan stepped onto pavement that had supported centuries of capitalism in its various forms, from merchants trading shares of shipping companies to algorithms moving billions in microseconds. Harper's hand found his automatically, her grip tight enough to communicate everything she couldn't say about being nervous and proud and scared her father was about to do something that would change their lives in ways she'd asked for, but might regret. Security recognized Ethan from credentials Warren Morrison had arranged, VIP access that raised no questions, because men who could afford Warren's influence rarely faced questions about belonging. The guard checked IDs with perfunctory efficiency of someone who'd processed hundreds of guests, and found them all equally unremarkable. "Mr. Thorne, welcome. You're on the executive list." The observation gallery occupied the floor above the VIP lounge, public seating for witnesses who wanted to watch history without networking obligations that accompanied champagne service. Ethan guided Harper to seats near the glass partition separating observation from participation, positioned where he could see Victoria preparing for her triumph without being immediately visible to anyone not specifically looking. Through the glass, Victoria laughed at something Blake whispered, her face carrying glow of someone who'd finally arrived at the destination she'd been promised since Harvard. Her parents stood close, Margaret's hand on her daughter's shoulder in gesture of ownership disguised as support. The room full of investors and board members and media representatives arranged themselves in configurations that would photograph well when the bell rang. But watching Victoria in her moment of triumph, Ethan felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction. Not even the cold certainty that had carried him here. Instead, A wave of doubt crashed over him with force that made him grip the armrest. What if this was too much? What if revealing the truth publicly, destroying her company in front of 600 witnesses, was cruelty disguised as justice? Harper had said it weeks ago. Tests are mean. And this wasn't a test anymore. This was punishment. Harper's whisper came quiet enough that only Ethan heard. "Dad, are you all right?" He looked at his daughter, saw Catherine's eyes and his own capacity for justifying cruelty by calling it something else. For 9 years, he'd hidden his wealth to protect himself from gold diggers. But at some point, protection had become testing, and testing had become a trap. And now, the trap was about to spring on someone he'd once loved, in the most public way possible. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. Harper studied his face with the wisdom that came from watching her father too closely for too long. "Is it too late to stop?" Ethan pulled out his phone. He could text Natasha right now. Tell her to hold the filing. Let Victoria have her IPO. The algorithms were public now anyway. He could sue later, quietly, settle for money he didn't need. Nobody had to be destroyed. But then he looked back through the glass at Victoria, radiant in her red dress, and remembered the contempt. Not just hers, but her parents', Blake's, everyone who'd looked at him and seen failure because he wore hoodies and drove a Camry. They hadn't just judged him wrongly. They'd judged everyone like him. People who built things, who created value, who didn't need to perform wealth because they were comfortable in their own skin. "No," he said finally. "It's not about punishing her. It's about showing the world that competence matters more than appearance. That the people who actually build things deserve credit for building them." Harper nodded slowly, seeming to accept this even if she didn't entirely believe it. 9:20 became 9:25, became 9:28. Victoria and Blake moved to the podium, overlooking the trading floor, their position framed by cameras that would broadcast this moment to millions of people who measured success in opening prices and valuation multiples. CNBC's coverage filled screens throughout the building, anchors providing commentary about StreamPay's trajectory and the significance of another female tech CEO breaking barriers. Sarah Eisen's voice carried enthusiasm. Networks reserved for good stories with clear heroes. History unfolding as we speak. StreamPay CEO Victoria Ashford Garrison about to ring the opening bell for what analysts predict will be one of the year's most successful fintech debuts. Victoria gripped the ceremonial gavel, her hand steady despite the magnitude of what came next. Blake stood beside her, close enough for cameras to capture the partnership they'd sold to investors as strategic synergy. Her parents beamed from their position in the VIP section, Richard's smile suggesting he'd always known his daughter would amount to something, despite marrying poorly the first time. 9:29:30, 9:29:45, 9:29:55. At precisely 9:30, Victoria brought the gavel down with force of someone who'd earned this moment through intelligence and ambition, rather than theft that actually funded it. The opening bell's brass clanging filled the exchange, traditional and somehow digital simultaneously. The sound of markets beginning another day of transforming capital into more capital. Confetti cannons detonated from positions throughout the VIP lounge, paper in StreamPay's corporate colors raining down on people who'd bet millions on Victoria's vision. The trading floor erupted in applause that echoed up to where Ethan watched, and the displays showed STRM going live with numbers that climbed immediately. Opening, $44, $47, $51, $54. Victoria kissed Blake with passion of someone who'd won against odds that had never actually been against. The champagne that had been poured too early now served its purpose, toasts echoing around the lounge to success and disruption and democratization of financial technology that StreamPay promised to deliver. 17 minutes later, at 9:47 Eastern, Natasha Blackwell walked into the Southern District Court of Manhattan, carrying documents that weighed more than their paper. The emergency injunction had been prepared for weeks, every citation verified, every piece of evidence organized in sequence that transformed theft into federal crime. The clerk accepted the filing with bureaucratic indifference of someone who processed hundreds of cases and had learned not to speculate about which ones mattered. But this one mattered. The judge's chambers received notification immediately. Protocol for filings marked emergency that alleged securities fraud and intellectual property theft at scale. Federal prosecutors got copied simultaneously. The SEC's Enforcement Division received alerts from systems designed to flag exactly this kind of disruption to public markets. And somewhere, in machinery that connected courts to exchanges, a message traveled that would stop StreamPay's momentum with finality of gravity asserting itself. 9:49. The displays throughout the NYSE froze mid-transaction, numbers that had been climbing suddenly static. The floor official's voice came through speakers with flat urgency of someone delivering bad news they didn't fully understand. Trading halt, symbol STRM, code regulatory concern, pending SEC review. Confusion rippled through the VIP lounge like a wave hitting shallow water. Victoria's champagne glass paused halfway to her lips, her expression shifting from celebration to calculation in the space between heartbeats. Blake grabbed his phone with reflexive urgency of someone whose first instinct was always to call someone more powerful than whatever problem had emerged. A floor official materialized beside the podium, tablet in hand, his face carrying careful neutrality of someone about to ruin a very good day. "Miss Ashford, we have an urgent situation." Victoria's voice came steady, despite acceleration of her pulse that anyone watching closely could see in the vein at her temple. "What situation? The stock is performing exactly as projected." The official handed her the tablet without comment, his job description not including emotional support for people whose IPOs exploded mid-celebration. The screen showed CNBC's breaking news banner, red text against black background, designed to capture attention in trading floors and offices across the country. StreamPay IPO halted. Emergency lawsuit filed. Ethan Thorne versus Victoria Ashford Garrison. Allegations: IP theft, securities fraud. Victoria's face drained of color, in a way no amount of professional makeup could disguise. The tablet trembled in her hands before Blake took it, his eyes moving across text with speed reading that Goldman training provided. "Ethan Thorne, your ex-husband?" The question was rhetorical. Blake knew who Ethan was, because he'd photographed Ethan's notebooks and built a company on Ethan's ideas, and stood in Ethan's house planning how to steal from someone they both believed was too passive to fight back. But knowing who Ethan was, and understanding what Ethan could do, were different categories of information entirely. Victoria's response came hollow. Voice of someone watching their understanding of reality reorganize itself around new, incompatible facts. "That's impossible." "He's merely a software engineer. He lacks resources for attorneys capable of..." CNBC's coverage interrupted her disbelief with information that spread through the VIP lounge faster than champagne had poured. Sarah Eisen's voice carried shock that professional news anchors usually suppressed, her disbelief evident despite years of training. "Extraordinary development in the StreamPay halt. According to federal court documents just filed, plaintiff Ethan Thorne is identified as..." The anchor paused, checking notes that couldn't possibly say what they apparently said. "The anonymous founder and chairman of Apex Financial Technologies, currently valued at $22 billion. Mr. Thorne's 42% stake in Apex is estimated at $9.2 billion. He has been living under what sources describe as a secret identity for nearly a decade following his first wife's death. The VIP lounge went silent, in the way rooms do when information arrives that nobody knows how to process. Every phone came out simultaneously, fingers moving across screens with desperate urgency of people who needed verification before accepting reality that contradicted everything they'd been told. Google searches flooded networks already strained by trading volume. Every variation of Ethan Thorne, Apex Financial, producing results that had been published in the 17 minutes since Natasha filed her documents. Forbes had the story first. Their technology beat reporter apparently tipped off about the filing and ready with an article that had been months in preparation. Breaking! Phantom of Silicon Valley revealed as Ethan Thorne in bombshell lawsuit against ex-wife. The Wall Street Journal's alert came 30 seconds later, their headline more direct. Anonymous billionaire Ethan Thorne, worth $9.2 billion, lived as software engineer to test ex-wife's love. She failed. TechCrunch's coverage included details about Apex Financial's founding, Ethan's stake, the deliberate anonymity he'd maintained through corporate structures and NDAs, and refusal to give interviews that had made him legendary among venture capitalists who'd tried and failed to get him on record. Wikipedia's page for Ethan Thorne appeared from nowhere, created by editors who worked faster than fact-checkers could verify. The text already comprehensive despite being minutes old. Ethan Thorne, American entrepreneur, technologist, philanthropist. Net worth, $9.2 billion, 2024. Founded, Apex Financial Technologies, 2010, 42% stake. Known for, anonymous business practices, living under assumed middle-class identity to avoid relationships motivated by wealth rather than character. Margaret Ashford stared at her iPhone with expression of someone watching their understanding of the past 3 years reorganize itself into a shape that made them look catastrophically wrong. Her voice came out strangled, careful modulation she'd maintained for 37 years of motherhood, collapsing under weight of implications she couldn't yet fully process. Victoria, you were married to a billionaire. $9 billion. The number sounded fictional, even to people in a room where individual net worth regularly exceeded 8 figures. $9 billion put Ethan in territory occupied by tech founders who'd built household names, investors who moved markets, the kind of wealth that made Richard Ashford's Wall Street success look middle management. Victoria's response came mechanical, her brain still catching up to information that contradicted everything she'd built her decisions on. No, that's not possible. He drove a Camry. He lived in a rental. He wore hoodies from tech conferences. But Richard Ashford was already reading Bloomberg on his tablet, his investment banker's instinct for verification overriding his daughter's denial. Bloomberg confirms, Ethan Thorne, founder Apex Financial, intentionally lived in disguise to avoid... He stopped reading, his face going through its own color transformation as implications settled. To avoid gold diggers and individuals motivated by wealth rather than character. The phrase hung in air thick with champagne and crushed expectations. Margaret's hand went to her mouth, decades of etiquette training providing no protocol for this particular flavor of humiliation. Oh, dear God. We called him insignificant. We said he lacked ambition. We encouraged you to divorce him. Blake had backed away from Victoria, with instinct of someone who'd spent 15 years at Goldman learning when to distance himself from deteriorating situations. His voice carried panic, poorly disguised as confusion. Victoria, did you know about this? The accusation was obvious. If Victoria had known and lied about it, Blake was complicit in defrauding investors about the origin of StreamPay's technology. If she genuinely hadn't known, then Blake had photographed notebooks and built a company on algorithms stolen from someone worth $9 billion who could afford to pursue prosecution until everyone involved was either bankrupt or imprisoned. No! I swear I had no knowledge! The denial probably qualified as truth. Victoria had genuinely believed she'd married a software engineer, had genuinely thought she was upgrading when she left him for Blake, had genuinely stolen from someone she thought lacked resources to fight back. The fact that every assumption was wrong didn't make the belief any less real in the moment of believing. Social media exploded with velocity that only combined wealth and humiliation could generate. Twitter's trending algorithm pushed Ethan's name to #1 within minutes. Millions of people who'd never heard of him, suddenly experts on his biography and business practices, and the ex-wife who'd made what everyone instantly recognized as the worst decision in tech industry history. The tweets came faster than anyone could read them, each adding commentary to a story that needed no embellishment. She divorced a $9 billion billionaire, thinking she upgraded to a Goldman VP worth maybe $40 million. This is the ultimate L. Ethan Thorne lived as poor engineer for 9 years, testing if people loved him versus his money. She failed the test spectacularly. Victoria Ashford stole her ex-husband's code, not knowing ex-husband was 9th richest person in tech. She's finished. The oak doors to the VIP lounge opened, with authority of security escorts who'd been paid to ensure access regardless of objections. Ethan walked through with Harper beside him, his Tom Ford suit and Patek Philippe and Berluti Oxfords announcing wealth with quiet certainty of someone who'd never needed to announce anything. The room parted without anyone consciously deciding to move, bodies creating space the way crowds do when power enters and demands acknowledgement. Whispers rippled through investors and board members and Victoria's parents, each person processing cognitive dissonance between the engineer they'd heard about and the billionaire who'd apparently been performance art. That's him. The billionaire. He looks so ordinary. $9 billion and he wore hoodies? Ethan's path to Victoria was direct, his steps measured, his expression carrying none of the triumph people expected from someone about to confront the ex-wife who'd dismissed him as failure. He stopped 4 feet from where she stood, frozen, champagne glass forgotten in her hand, her face cycling through emotions faster than she could suppress them. The silence that followed held weight of 200 people holding their breath simultaneously. Victoria's voice came out cracked, professional polish abandoned in favor of raw confusion. Ethan, I didn't know. I had no idea. The words were probably true and entirely beside the point. Ethan's response came quiet enough that people in the back had to strain to hear. I'm aware you didn't. The acknowledgement should have been comfort. Instead, it was indictment. Confirmation that Victoria had judged him without knowing what she was judging. That her contempt had been based on appearance rather than substance. That she'd failed a test she hadn't known she was taking. Why didn't you tell me? We were married for 2 years. The question assumed obligation to honesty in a relationship Ethan had designed as experiment. His answer came with calm of someone who'd had 9 years to prepare for this exact conversation. Because I needed to know if you loved me, or if you loved what I could provide. Victoria's desperation broke through whatever remained of her composure, her voice rising with pitch of someone watching their life detonate in real time. I did love you. I genuinely. But Ethan's interruption was gentle, final, tone of someone correcting a factual error rather than attacking. You called me a failure. You said I lacked ambition. You left me for someone with trajectory. Each statement was verifiable fact. Words Victoria had actually said in context she'd thought private. The public recitation transformed them into evidence rather than opinion. Proof of judgment she couldn't deny making. I made an error, a catastrophic error. We can rectify this. We can... The suggestion died before completion, because both of them knew rectification was impossible. Ethan's headshake carried weight of finality that came from decisions made months ago. No, Victoria. We cannot. Because now I'll never know if you want me or my fortune. Blake attempted intervention with courage of someone who'd spent his career managing difficult conversations for Goldman clients. He stepped forward, phone already out, probably with his lawyer on speed dial. "Ethan, we can negotiate a settlement. StreamPay will compensate you for—" The laugh that escaped Ethan carried no humor whatsoever, just dry acknowledgement of absurdity. "I don't require your money, Blake. I possess substantially more than you'll accumulate in several lifetimes." Natasha Blackwell materialized beside Ethan with perfect timing that came from coordinating this reveal for months. She handed Victoria a document with clinical efficiency of someone delivering terminal diagnosis. Ethan's voice stayed level, factual, tone of someone reading from a script that required no emotional investment. "This is a cease and desist order. StreamPay is constructed on stolen intellectual property. You have 72 hours to initiate shutdown procedures." Victoria's hands trembled as she read text that deconstructed her company paragraph by paragraph. Patent infringement, securities fraud via material misrepresentation, theft of trade secrets, criminal referrals to the Department of Justice pending SEC investigation results. "Ethan, please. This is my career, my reputation, everything." The begging was automatic, response of someone drowning who'd grab at anything floating past. But Ethan had made his decision 10 months ago when he'd walked away from $400,000 in divorce assets, and pity wasn't part of the calculation. "You should have considered consequences before committing theft." Harper stepped forward then, 11 years old and done watching her father accept less than he deserved. Her voice carried particular moral clarity that children possess before the world teaches them compromise. "You made my dad feel worthless, but he's the most important person in the world. And now everyone knows." Victoria looked at Harper with expression of someone seeing clearly for the first time what she'd actually lost. Not money or status, or even the career that was currently disintegrating, but respect of a child who'd watched her stepmother choose ambition over integrity. "Harper, sweetheart, I'm so—" But Harper's interruption came sharp, final, rejection of apologies that came too late to matter. "You're not my mom. You never were." Her hand found Ethan's, small fingers wrapping around his palm, with possessive certainty of a daughter reclaiming her father from people who'd tried to diminish him. Victoria's final attempt at negotiation came desperate, incoherent, scrambling of someone who'd run out of cards to play. "What do you want? Money? I'll surrender everything I have." Ethan's response came with the same calm he'd maintained throughout, emotional flatness of someone who'd processed these feelings months ago and arrived at clarity. "I wanted nothing 10 months ago. I want nothing now." He turned to leave, Harper matching his steps with synchronized precision of people who'd walked together through harder moments than this. Victoria's scream followed them toward the exit, raw and desperate, and too late. "Ethan, I'm sorry! I'm so sorry!" Ethan stopped without turning, his voice carrying just far enough for Victoria to hear, but not so loud that it performed for the crowd. "I believe you are. Goodbye, Victoria." The doors closed behind them, with finality of chapters ending. Outside the exchange, reporters swarmed with cameras, capturing the moment Ethan Thorne and his daughter walked past journalists who shouted questions about revenge and testing, and whether he planned to press criminal charges. His statement was brief, factual, delivered with the same emotional neutrality he'd maintained throughout. "I built Apex to democratize finance. That mission continues. We'll proceed with our IPO when we're ready, under honest leadership." Someone from Bloomberg pushed through the crowd with aggressive persistence that made her good at her job. "Will you press charges against your ex-wife?" Ethan's pause suggested he'd expected the question, and prepared an answer that served truth without satisfaction. That decision belongs to the SEC and Department of Justice. I simply want to correct the record about who built what. 72 hours transformed into professional devastation that happened when federal agencies decided to make examples. StreamPay filed for bankruptcy protection on December 20th. The SEC opened formal criminal investigation into Victoria and Blake. Investor lawsuits materialized, seeking $350 million in damages. Victoria resigned as CEO at her board's insistence. She moved back to Boston on December 23rd, returning to her parents' house with specific humiliation that came from needing shelter from people who'd encouraged the decisions that led to this. Blake discovered that Goldman Sachs had termination clauses for employees whose federal investigations threatened the bank's reputation. His departure was announced in a press release mentioning pursuing other opportunities. 6 months later, June arrived in New York with heat that made the NYSE's air conditioning work harder. The opening bell ceremony for Apex Financial Technologies drew the crowd that successful IPOs generated. Ethan stood at the podium with Harper beside him, no longer hiding behind hoodies and assumed poverty. The stock opened at $76 per share, valuation hitting $28 billion. Ethan's 42% stake was worth $11.76 billion, but Ethan's expression carried peace rather than triumph. The interview happened after the ceremony. Sarah Eisen's questions were predictable, professional. "Mr. Thorne, you were anonymous for 9 years. Why reveal yourself now?" His answer came without preparation, just honest reflection. "Because my daughter deserves a father who doesn't hide, and because truth always emerges." "Any message for your ex-wife?" Ethan's pause suggested he'd thought about this specific question.
"I wish her well. I hope she finds what she's searching for."
"But I've found what I was searching for." His hand gestured toward Harper. 1 year later, December brought Ethan and Harper to Carmel by the Sea, the Pacific Ocean spreading west toward horizons holding nothing but water. The beach was empty despite the weekend, most people deterred by winter cold. Harper walked ahead, searching for sand dollars. Her voice carried back over wind. "Dad, do you ever miss her?" "I miss who I believed she was, not who she truly was." Harper found a perfect sand dollar, ran back to show him with excitement that made 12 look young. "Look what I found!" Ethan examined the shell with seriousness the moment deserved. Everything that mattered came from the finding rather than the having. They walked back toward the parking lot as sunset painted the ocean in shades cameras could never capture. The Porsche waited where they'd left it. His final thought before starting the engine was that authentic love couldn't be tested by deception, that truth always revealed character, and that the most valuable thing he possessed was sitting beside him, checking her phone, texting friends about sand dollars and beach days, and the normal concerns of 12-year-olds whose fathers had stopped pretending to be someone they weren't. The Porsche pulled onto Highway 1, carrying them north toward home and whatever came next.